Today's Top 5 Wednesday is top 5 books that made you think, so let's do this. Hi everybody, it's Lydia here. So before I start, I just want to say I'm just getting over a cold, which is why I will slightly sound like Gollum in this video. What can you do? This week's top 5 is pretty self-explanatory. It's just 5 books that have made you think in one way or another, so let's do this. My number 5 this week is actually slightly different to the other books in this top 5, and that's why I put it at number 5, because it made me think, but it didn't make me think in the way that I think this top 5 is meant to make you think. Anyway, if you understood that, it is S by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. I put this at 5 because it really did make me think the entire way through, and afterwards I did go back and look over it, and it is the kind of book that you can reread 5 times and it will make you go back over it and want to reread it, and it did just make me think about books in general. So I know this top 5 isn't so much going to be about that, and all the other books that I have picked are more about what the actual stories made me think about, but I just really felt like this book was interesting, and it did certainly make me think about books and the power of books in a completely different way to any other book has made me think about that before. So that's why it's my number 5. At number 4 is Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I studied this in high school, and a lot of the people whom I studied it with didn't really get on with it, but it was by far one of my favourite books that I actually studied in school because it really did make me think about society in a completely different way. I read it when I was about 14 or 15, and I was probably on the verge of that kind of realising that the world isn't that happy-go-lucky place that you think it is when you're a kid, and this book really sort of probably pushed me along in that direction, and it's just a very interesting take on the human condition, and because obviously it's told from the point of view of children, or it's told about children, so you'd think, you know, it would be slightly more light-hearted, but the fact that it is kids makes it even more monstrous in a way. I would honestly recommend anyone read this book. It is actually a really well written book. On top of being a really interesting idea, it is actually just a really enjoyable, in inverted commas. It's not like a happy book, but it's just a really well written book, and I enjoyed reading it from that point of view, so I would really recommend checking it out, because as well as being well written, it does just really make you think about humans and society and what we would be like if we were put in a situation where we would have to survive and the survival instinct kicked in. So it's really interesting, and I really recommend checking it out. My number 3 this week is a play and not a book. I know I'm really bad at putting plays into these top 5s, but what can you do? I like plays. So my number 3 is The Crucible by Arthur Miller. This, for those of you who don't know, is about the Salem witch trials, but the reason it made me think and really is one of my favourite plays of all time is because it was written during the McCarthy era, and Miller purposely wrote it as a sort of mirror up to society to say, look, what we're doing right now in terms of communism and all that jazz, this has happened before and it wasn't good back then, so we need to like step back a second and say, wait, this isn't right. It's a really incredible play. I absolutely love it. I would really recommend reading it or going to see it if you can. I saw a production of it last year at the Old Vic here in London, which is currently being screened in cinemas. I know it's being screened in the UK. I think it's probably being screened worldwide as well. It's got Richard Armitage in, and it's not the best Crucible production I've ever seen, but if you do want to see this instead of reading it, I really recommend going to see that because it is really good. Or you can watch the film with Daniel Day-Lewis because that is really good as well, but yeah, if you can go see it on stage, it's brilliant. At number 2 is Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. I read this when I was quite young, and a lot of people were reading it at the time, and because it is a middle grade book, it's aimed towards kids, and it really for me kind of opened my eyes to the realities of our own world. For those of you who don't know, Noughts and Crosses is about a world where white people are the ones who are oppressed, and it is just such an incredible book. There's a whole load of these books and I really recommend reading them whatever age you are. As I say, it is middle grade, but it is a really good book and I would recommend it to anyone. But for me, from my point of view, when I read this, obviously I'm white. I grew up in a fairly conservative part of England, middle class and all that jazz, and so when I was a kid there were a lot of things I didn't really even think about. I just took for granted that was the same for everyone regardless of race or ethnicity or anything, and this book really highlighted my privilege in a way for me, just with really simple things like plasters or band-aids as you call them in America. You go into shops over here and I personally I just take for granted the fact that there will be plasters that match my skin colour. I don't even think about the fact that there won't be that. And there was a moment in this book where one of the characters who is white goes into a shop to get a plaster, and of course none of them match her skin colour because in this world white people are the oppressed, so she can't find any plasters that match her skin colour, and it's something that I completely take for granted, and it really just highlighted for me the imbalance in our own world. And it's just such a good book and has just really opened my eyes at such a young age, and I would really recommend anyone read it. My final book in this top 5 this week is actually not a fiction book, it is a non-fiction book, and I think I've mentioned it before on this channel. It is Escape from Camp 14 by Blaine Harden. This book just completely changed my worldview and my perception of media and government and just everything, really. It tells the story of Shin Dong-hook, who was a political prisoner in North Korea up until the early 2000s, and he was a political prisoner in the infamous Camp 14, which is a camp so bad that the North Korean government even refused to admit that it exists. When this was written, he was the only person to have ever escaped Camp 14 alive. I think that still holds true today, and it is an incredibly eye-opening account. It's not an easy read. From the first few pages it is just horrific, but it is incredible, and I recommend this to everyone because it is just a book that really just completely changed my perception of not just North Korea but of governments in general, and of censorship and media and just everything. I really recommend checking this out. So that is it for my top 5 this week. It wasn't exactly a light-hearted one, was it? But there we go. I will be back soon with another video, but until then, bye!